Well, thanks, Nicole, and thanks, Christy, for weather. Well, we've had quite an interesting week here in East Lansing. We are now at 11 days with no precipitation and counting. The message here is that some changes are coming. It's not going to be right away, but there are changes coming, and it's caused really an amazing a variety of different impacts at this time of the season. Some are positive and some are not so positive, but we'll talk more about those in just a second here. Uh, I wanted to start with a brief overview of conditions this past summer as we look back in here trying to wrap up or at least this part of the growing season. But our growing season in Michigan was a little bit warmer than normal in most areas on the right-hand side here. This is actually that map is looking at the core summer months of June, July, and August collectively. So the areas with the brown and the tan colors here are a little bit above normal. There were a couple spots that were at or a degree below normal. A lot of the departure from normal came, the positive came early in the season. And in the upper right-hand corner, I've got and it's a little difficult to see, but it's a chart of the daily max mins. This one goes back to the beginning of May and actually goes up through the early part of this week. And I think the thing to notice here are the sort of the weekly patterns. And one of the things that we've talked about this before that was really interesting about the 2024 growing season was really the lack of variability in the core of especially during July and August. And you can see that here with our temperatures, observed temperatures, which were in blue, right in the right close to what the normals say we should be. And again, we don't see that very often. If you go back and look at the spring, you can see big swings approximately every 5 to 7 days or so from much above normal, some cases to below normal and back and forth, or sort of a roller coaster ride. We've been there again over the last few weeks. But again, the core, one of the really, I think, important messages especially for our annual crops this year was that just period in July and August of very, very stable temperatures with lack of, and of course, on top of that, we had in many areas of the state, we had much above normal precipitation. And that's what these graphics here show. But it is also important to note that, there are areas here, some of them in upper Michigan, especially western upper Michigan, and also portions of northern lower and central lower, which just missed out on some of the major, the remnants of Hurricane Beryl, for example, back in July, were missed. But if you look at percent of normal here for June, July, and August on the right-hand side here, you can see an awful lot of colors. And so we go from areas that had over 15, 16 inches of rain. And actually, that ranks, by the way, in some of these places, certainly in the top 5 wettest summers on record. But there were areas, western upper Michigan, central lower, that saw and observed much, much less. So it depends on where you are. And that's why it's important to have that perspective here. So most of the state, yes, it was a wet summer, especially for the southern half of lower Michigan, but there were definitely some notable exceptions to that. Now, one last thing too, regarding our current situation. On the upper right, I've got another accumulated precipitation total here. This is for Lansing, so take that a little bit of into consideration here. It's representative, though, of much of central and southern lower Michigan, but you can see the accumulation of precipitation in green relative to the normals in brown, or the climate normals. And you can see that it was a little drier than normal in the late spring and into the early part of the summer. And then we were right along the normal accumulation here during the second half of June and part of July. And then the rainfall just went off the charts. We had repeated major weather systems. And so for southern Michigan, especially southeastern lower Michigan, we had a huge surplus of precipitation here. And you can see where our green line goes way above the brown. And then note, when we got to, late August and early September, that line flattens off. And that is this dry period that we've been in here now, much of the state for the last several weeks, and including, of course, the current dry spell, which is state and actually region wide. And again, we don't see very often climatologically, we don't see 11 consecutive dry days that frequently in Michigan, but we have now. There'll be a 12th, and then probably a break in that pattern here as there are changes coming here, but it'll take a few days for that to happen. In the last week, and just to not to spend much time on that, definitely warmer than normal on the far left-hand side here. You can see some places approaching 10 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, so much above where we typically are for the middle of September. Just as importantly, as I mentioned, most of the states had no observed precip during the last week. A few hundreds in the far northern part of the state, but look at that, not just Michigan, but all much of the central and eastern Corn Belt were completely dry during that time frame. So, and it does on the right-hand side here, the 30-day deficits in precipitation are pretty significant. Many cases less than 25% of normal precip now going back to the middle of August. And that leaves us here, and we haven't talked about drought, the word drought. I don't even want to use the word drought, because, and especially given where we are in the growing season. But many of the indices here that we follow and monitor conditions and dryness and soil moisture, et cetera, have really shifted over the last couple of weeks. The short-term drought index on the left-hand side and the longer term here, but you can see increasing areas in Michigan, especially in the Upper Peninsula, portions of the northern and central lower that we just identified here, are showing up as abnormally dry. The latest drought monitor map here down to the bottom, up to now 35% of the state primarily in abnormally dry, but also a little bit of D1 here and there. You can see most of that again is concentrated in the northern part of the state, but also note that there is an area in the far southern lower along the Indiana and Ohio lines that have also been abnormally dry. And it's a really sharp gradient or drop off there. And conditions go from actually almost still a little bit abnormally wet for this time of the year to or unfavorably dry. So it's a very, very sharp cutoff from north to south across the far southern part of the state. So lots happening, again, depending on your location, and many, many different impacts associated with that, of course, as well. And those range, the positive ones, we look at our annual crops, especially with corn. We're getting, with this kind of weather, the dry down rates that we're getting are way above normal. It's free natural drying that we won't have to pay for. So again, unless you sell natural gas, and so forth, you should be a fairly happy camper with the situation. It's a gift from Mother Nature. It's also accelerating, hastening the dry down and senescence of our crops. But it's for Michigan and for much of the Corn Belt, this is money in the bank or economic, and that in a year where we have low prices, that hopefully will help. It won't cure the situation, but certainly should help. It's better than having to pay additional drying costs. And on the other hand side, there's always the other side of the fence, and that is that we have cover crops, we have wheat planting that we have to think about, and of course, given this recent dryness, our topsoils now in many areas are very, very abnormally dry, and that creates problems and challenges for that. So let's look here at the forecast, because I think there's some encouraging news on that front, at least in the near term future here. One last thing on degree days. Not many. We've seen this pattern for the whole growing season, but basically our degree day accumulations beginning in May, and actually for the whole season, it doesn't really matter when you start it, but this is the beginning of May. We have some minor deficits in the far northern part of the state, but given the recent warmth, they're less than they were, and we have surpluses still in the south. So things are a little bit ahead in the far south and at or pretty close to normal in the far north. We don't anticipate problems or challenges with that, especially given the outlook. So most of the state, though, still looking at a surplus degree day situation. Well, mentioned in the forecast, there are changes coming. They're not going to be overnight. A lot of maps here, lots of colors, but the pattern that we've had here for the last week, and the forecast guidance really did pretty well last week. This is the lower left-hand corner here, this big upper air ridge across eastern North America. You can see that down here. And note underneath this thing, we've got a trough in the southern branch of the jet stream. This is, the meteorologists sometimes refer to this as a Rex block. It's a fancy word, but what it means is that it's basically one of the things that locks. Our jet stream usually is constantly moving and changing. With these blocks here, we have persistence of the patterns. And if you're underneath that ridge, like we have been, basically there's sinking or subsidence in the atmosphere, and that's how we've got our well, I've sort of nicknamed it our glimpse of California weather and climate here. We've had about a week and a half worth of it. We don't once in a while we see it here in Michigan, but this has been a case of it, and that's the reason why. Now, to the right of that, here are forecast conditions by next week. And notice that block, well, the big ridge has shifted out to the north and east over Greenland and the North Atlantic. And you can see in its place we have still above normal or a little higher pressure than normal here, but we have a different configuration. We have some flow more out of the west, even the northwest, some troughing. So there are going to be some changes coming. And that's the bottom line. In the background, these are temperature forecast departures for the same time frame looking into next week. They still call for warmer than normal mean temperatures, but important to note, they won't be as much abnormal as what we have seen over the last week. Yes, it'll be warmer, but not it'll be noticeably cooler actually than it has been. And just as importantly, or even more importantly for some, it does also suggest many more chances or more frequent chances for precipitation. Hard to pin those down right now in the timing, but definitely more chances for precip than what we've seen in the last 1 to 2 weeks. Our weather map here this morning, high pressure still. And today, so a day is another carbon copy of the last several mid to low to mid 80s for high temperatures, sunny skies. Again, translocate California to the Great Lakes, and that's sort of what you've got. Well, one more day of that for most of us. But notice off to the west here, there is the next weather system approaching. That's a frontal boundary and an area of low pressure moving across southern Canada. That's the next weather system. That is going to cause or lead to the development of scattered showers and thunderstorms beginning in western upper Michigan here this evening, and then spreading in south and east overnight and into tomorrow. Most of lower Michigan will see best chances for rain tomorrow. The best chances we've seen in most areas in a couple of weeks. I would note though, and the good news is I think that the forecasts have become a little bit more bullish on precipitation with this. Initially, we looked at this and it doesn't look like a very major, it's still not a major weather system, but the chances and the precipitation amounts that the forecast guides is suggesting are higher than they were a day or two ago. So that's a trend that's worth noting. Best chances though with this weather system. Here's tomorrow morning's weather map at 8 o'clock, and you can see the green there. Again, scattered showers and thunderstorms. Best chances for precip with this will be across, especially upper Michigan, but northern parts of the state, maybe a little bit in the west, and then less as you go east. So I think that for the upper peninsula, the northern lower, we're looking at a pretty good chance of a quarter of an inch or more of precipitation here tonight and early tomorrow, and it'll be less as you go south. There will be many areas right now, and this isn't good for those areas along the southern border of the state, but probably don't see precip, maybe only a 20 or 30% chance tomorrow. But the other news here is that that's not our last chance. We will see another one Saturday. As we move into Saturday, high pressure moves in again temporarily here. Another warm, and a really summer-like day on Saturday for most of the states. Highs back in the low to mid 80s once again, much above normal. Low temperatures, by the way, still falling off into the 50s to near 60 in most areas for the next several days. But the next weather system, there is another one, not like the last week, but we have another one coming in late Sunday and Monday. And from the forecast guidance I showed you here earlier of the next week, a much more active, and I call it an unsettled pattern with several chances for precipitation almost on a daily basis. And while not everybody might get rain in one day, over time, with many frequent chances, we should get some certainly significant precipitation in most areas. And that leads to our precip forecast here for the upcoming week. And this is certainly different from what we've seen over the last 2 weeks. You can see for most of the state, 0.5 to 1 inch totals per day. I think it's maybe a little bit aggressive, or me personally, putting the colors and the numbers here, but still, for many people, this will be definitely the most significant precip we've had in a couple of weeks. and it won't fall all at one time. It'll be scattered over time, which makes the management a little harder. But I'm thinking again about the folks that have really dry topsoils right now. This should make at least a temporary difference in that there'll be more water that'll be needed, especially for those that have to plant in fall cover or put in, or thinking about wheat planting. We need more than a half an inch to get things, but at least it's a start and it's a break in the current pattern. I think that's the most important take home. Potential of evapotranspiration rates here for the next week, near to above normal, especially in the short term. Daily averages here from about 900ths of an inch per day on average in the far north to about 13 or 1400ths per inch per day. And again, we're getting close to the end of the season, but given the areas that have been dry, water management and the needs for water management have certainly been interesting for this time of the year, and a little bit of a demand here for many people this year because of this, again, recent dry spell. So let's go beyond that for the medium range. This reflects some of the graphics we started with when we looked at the forecast, but on the jet stream forecast for the 28th through the or 24th through the 28th, you can see movement of a big trough. This is actually what's left of the big trough that's out west right now, and has led to some major changes in weather out there, including some of the first snowfall of the year in the western mountains. We won't get that, but we will get a remnant of that, pieces of that, and certainly cooler temperatures. There'll still be above normal, the climate normals, but definitely cooler than what we have observed over the last week. And so for our mean temperature forecast, warmer than normal conditions, very likely, both for the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day time frame, although not as much. And then precipitation, at least normal. Most areas we might even see a little bit above normal. That's a change, certainly in direction for the next 1 to 2 weeks, and it reflects that more active, unsettled pattern we talked about. So let's move beyond that. Where are we for the long lead outlooks? There's a new ensemble coming out. It comes out here actually in the next couple of hours from the Climate Prediction Center, but I don't anticipate many changes from what you see right here. But the big news is, at least in terms of the long term, is that we are watching the equatorial Pacific, and that's here on the left. These are sea surface temperatures, the colored patterns here. And the important thing is to note here, these are the anomalies or the differences from normal. And you can see some blue colors here off the western coast of South America and Central America. And that is, while we are technically neutral, so neither La Nina or El Nino, we were in El Nino, and it's things have cooled off out there. That cooler than normal water that you see developing here, that is likely the beginning of a La Nina, a cool event coming up here this fall, later this fall and into this winter, which has pretty significant impacts, at least on our outlooks. And on the right-hand side here, right now, expecting very likely 70 to 80% probability of the development of at least a moderate La Nina event for this fall. In some ways, it's a positive thing in terms of the forecast, because there are a number of weather conditions that are associated with this, and our winter forecast is based largely on this factor. Not so much for the fall. For the fall season itself, if we look at that, still a continuation of some of what you saw in the medium range forecast guidance, normal or certainly warmer than normal mean temperatures. The down the bottom two panels here are forecast mean temperatures for the fall season, September through November, and then precip, really no direction. Although, again, we've seen drier than normal recently, maybe now a little bit wetter than normal in the short term, but the big message here for the fall is still warmer than normal. So thinking about Christie's comment about the weeds, it probably will, at least in terms of averages, we will have an extended growing season here for the next several weeks, or at least warmer than we typically do at this time of the year. And then looking beyond that at the winter, and I mentioned La Nina, what do we typically see in La Nina? Well, one of the big messages there is we typically see above normal precip. You can see that on the right-hand side here. This is the December through February forecast. No direction on mean temperatures. Some cases where we end up a little cooler than normal, but generally here, no direction on forecast mean temperatures during the winter, but definitely wetter than normal. And what that translates to, you can probably guess. Usually that means more snow than normal. So we can say, besides wetter than normal, that would probably include, it doesn't mean it's a slam dunk guarantee, but odds are we see higher than normal seasonal snowfall totals this year because of La Nina. And so wrapping up here, we've had a lot to cover here this morning. More in the short term, more warm, dry weather in the very, very near term future, but changes on the way beginning here overnight and tomorrow with the first really significant chance of rain we've had in over a week in Michigan. Fair on again on Saturday and warm, summer like, but then another chance late in the weekend and then into next week. At least the first half of next week, chances of showers and thunderstorms almost on a daily basis. And so I think the big message there is that most of the states should get some significant rainfall to change what has developed here over the last few days. And then as we've just talked about the medium and long leads, still warmer than normal with a little bit more water in the next 2 weeks, but then in the fall, still again warmer than normal is the forecast direction. And with that, I'll wrap up or try. It's been a long one here this morning. Thanks for your patience and thanks for questions and some of the discussion here over the growing season. But good luck with harvest and upcoming fall field work opportunities and challenges here. Thanks.